Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to spring. It's nice and snowing out for us. I know, and good morning, John. I think I know 90% of the people in the audience, but thank you all for coming out. I am not the moderator for today's panel. I'm going to introduce him in a second, but I'm up here. I'm John Marion from Common Cause, Rhode Island. I'm up here just to give thanks to a few people who made this possible. The Rhode Island School of Design, particularly Babette Alina and Pam Kimmel, give us this room as an in-kind contribution to our work, and so we just always want to thank them. I have to read this thing, which is that the emergency exits are there, and I think over here. And then also there are restrooms out in the hall if you go past the registration desk. And they ask that you please do not drink or eat in the auditorium. Common Cause has been hosting some events here for a number of years. We call them, you might guess, Demystifying Democracy. And this year we're excited because we're co-hosting one for the first time. So I think Ed's going to do it the same, but I will thank the co-hosts, the ACLU of Rhode Island, and I know Steve and Hannah and others are here from the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, and Jane and Susan and others are here from the League of Women Voters, the New England First Amendment Coalition, and Justin Silverman couldn't be here, but sends his regrets. Access Rhode Island, and Linda Levin is here from Access. And then the Rhode Island Press Association, and James is here from the Rhode Island Press Association. So thank you to them all for co-hosting these events. Some of the groups have materials out at the registration table, so if you didn't get the materials, you're welcome to, including the very helpful ACLU Know Your Rights brochures about the public records and open meetings laws that we're going to talk about today. And I will just make the pitch on behalf of all the groups. If you are engaged by these subjects, these groups all are nonprofits, and you can support them financially as well. And there's information about how to do that outside. Just two more things. We're videotaping today's event, and we'll put it online this week to make it available so that those who couldn't join us can watch it online. And it's going to be on, we've built a website out called creatively, demystifyingdemocracy.org. And so that has, we'll have this video and videos from all our past events up there already. And there's also a toolkit that Common Cause has built, an advocacy toolkit that you can get there. Finally, I'm just going to thank the panelists, Ethan Shorey, Amanda Milkovich, and Dan McGowan for joining us this morning. You'll hear their introductions from Ed in a second. And then finally, just thanking Ed Fitzpatrick, our moderator. Ed is the president of the Common Cause board at the moment, is also on the board of the other sponsoring organization, the New England First Amendment Coalition. He's the director of media and public relations at Roger Williams University, and prior to that, and teaches as adjunct in the journalism department there. And then prior to that, served as a reporter and columnist for the Providence Journal and a number of great upstate New York newspapers. He's a proud alum of the first round loser in the NCAA tournament, Syracuse University. So welcome, Ed. Yeah.
I had to bring that up. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming out on a cold and windy Saturday morning to talk about public records and open meetings. I'll explain my hand first of all. I was down in D.C. yesterday and tried to get a hold of the Mueller report. And the Secret Service, let's say, unnecessary force. Welcome to, this is the latest installment, as Sean said, of Demystifying Democracy. Learn from the experts, and we've got three of the leading experts in the state here today, how to use Rhode Island's public records and open meetings law. This is part of a Sunshine Week event. Now, technically, it's not Sunshine Week. That's over. That was March 10th through the 16th, but I like to think Sunshine Week is more of a state of mind, and you know, we definitely need more sunshine, more than 1 week per year. here in Rhode Island. Just to explain that, though, it was launched in 2005. Sunshine Week has grown into a really enduring annual initiative to promote open government and push back against excessive official secrecy. Sunshine Week was created by the American Society of News Editors, and is now coordinated in partnership with the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. As John mentioned, this morning's event's co-hosted by Access Rhode Island, the Rhode Island ACLU, the League of Women Voters of Rhode Island, and NEFAC, New England First Amendment Coalition, which I serve on the board with Amanda. You're in for a treat this morning because our panel members are on the front lines of the daily battle for public records and open meetings, and they really are, I think, some of the best journalists working in Rhode Island right now. Amanda Milkovich is a reporter for the Providence Journal. Worked with her for years, where she covers crime and justice stories since 2000. She's accustomed to battling police agencies over public records. I can tell you she's crushed a lot of 5K road races in the great state of Rhode Island over the years. Dan McGowan joined Eyewitness News Channel 12 in 2013 as a reporter where he covers Providence, politics, and education. He's accustomed to fighting City Hall. Don't let anybody tell you can't fight City Hall. He's proven you can do it, and he has spent many years as a baseball coach for the Mount Pleasant Little League team. Ethan Shorey is managing editor of the Valley Breeze newspapers. He began working there as a staff reporter in 2006. He became the online news editor in 2014, and he took over as managing editor in 2017. He's also one of the state's leading winter grillers. You'll see him grilling in the sun and the rain and the sleet and the snow. And he's probably grilling immediately after today's event. So just to start with Amanda, earlier this month, Amanda and her colleague Tom Mooney did a great in-depth front page story in the Providence Journal. It was titled Transparency Under Assault, Government Secrecy in Rhode Island. And they couldn't have been a better primer, a better table setter for tonight's event. So let's start with Amanda. Can you tell us what happened when former State Rep Patricia Morgan filed a request for information about how the office of now former Attorney General Peter Kilmartin spent $59 million in Google settlement money that it had received for its role in exposing a shady prescription drug marketing technique?
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Ed, for the introduction. For the Journal, we're going to be writing about transparency, or the lack thereof, in Rhode Island for over a year. So you look forward to that, and the reason is because there's just so much to write about. So we had Patricia Morgan, who was part of our story on a Sunday, and poor Patricia Morgan, she just wanted to find out how the Attorney General Kilmartin had spent $59 million in Google settlement money. And she received a memo that was almost all completely redacted. I don't know if we have that slide. It's the one that's a little forward here. It says it's a purchase order for label pins and challenge coins for the Attorney General's department. And the Attorney General justified redacting that because calling it a memo. Now, when the ACLU asked for this, they received the entire thing. Patricia Morgan is challenging this. Attorney General Nerona is going to review how this was handled. I mean, the problem that Steve Brown had really brought up is that judging this as a memo, judging other pieces of information as a memo, could mean that thousands of state and municipal documents that we normally receive would end up becoming exempt. This is a real concern, and the ACLU has called this something that could end up becoming one of the most significant challenges to the public's right to know. And one of the things under APRA is being able to obtain documents so that we understand what our government is doing. And the Attorney General under Kilmartin, Attorney General's office under Peter Kilmartin, had determined that this was something that was sort of a preliminary document. And that really wasn't the case once we got to see it.
Yeah, and just to describe, we don't have the slide, but the first version that you were given of the memo was almost completely redacted.
It is actually that you can kind of see it. It's the more forward document is what she received. So they did a great job with the marker.
But then...
And the one below it is the actual document the ACLU received. Same document.
Yeah. And how did the ACLU get that document?
They asked for it.
And who gave it to him?
And the Attorney General's office gave it to them.
And the new Attorney General?
And the new Attorney General's office gave it to them, and I think the explanation at the time was the ACLU was a little more specific in what I was asking for, which, come on, it's the same document. And that's part of the thing, when we're introduced as experts, I mean, I think what it comes down to being an expert and using the access to public record, learning how to use public records is really just going after it over and over again. And all of us have stories of success. All of us have stories of beating our heads against a wall, trying to find a door, finding out it's locked, and looking for the window. And that's, I think, some of the things that we want to talk about here today is how you can find that window.
Speaking of beating your head against the door, let me just go to Ethan. And can you tell us what happened when you were trying to get into a public meeting in Pawtucket, a school committee meeting, right?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you all for being here today and having an interest in open government. It's encouraging to see. Back in 2013, a lot of what we do at the Valley Breeze is to cover municipal meetings, school committees, the real day-to-day operations. And so I showed up at an alternate location for the school committee, which was the administration building. And if you know the building, it's deep in the bowels of the building where they actually have the meeting. So I showed up, door was locked, lights were off. I started ringing the bell. It was 6 o'clock in the summertime, so it was still light out. So I was there for about 15 minutes, and finally somebody came. The only thing I didn't do during that time was like go throw rocks at the front window, the second floor window. But what ended up happening was, instead of just admitting they'd done something wrong, it only ended up being a half-hour meeting. They challenged it and said that they tried to prove that I was lying and that I hadn't actually rung the doorbell. So they pulled surveillance photos, submitted those to the Attorney General, showing that they were trying to show that I hadn't actually pushed the doorbell. But when they couldn't get that footage, they decided to say how I was lying by saying that I showed up at 6 when I had actually shown up at 6:02. So, I mean, it was 6 months later, it was the same similar story. They held a meeting, another open meetings complaint, another finding that I was right. And 2 years before that, they locked out a guy who would later go on the school committee. So it was a pattern of behavior for them. I will say that they've improved a lot since then. But
And when you got locked out, what did you do? Did you file a complaint?
I did, yes.
And what happened as a
It
result
was a
of the
very
complaint?
simple complaint. I got locked out of the meeting, and I banged on the windows. I rang the doorbell.
You
And
filed it with who?
The Attorney General's
And what
office.
did the Attorney General's
Which
office?
anybody can do, by the way. It's very easy. I do most of my stuff by email. Nobody likes that, but I don't really care because it's allowed and it's the easiest thing for me. So they responded, and many, many months later, they came up with a decision and found that I was right, and there was no real punishment. It was just like, don't do this again. 6 months later, they did it again. So.
And what happened when they did it again?
That time I asked that it be found to be a willful violation because I had warned the school committee chairman that their agenda was inaccurate and that it wasn't a lawful discussion. And they ended up having an hour-long discussion about a switch to a new superintendent. The old one was going to stay on as a consultant. And I said, listen, man, I'm going to file a complaint as soon as this meeting's over. And he's like, oh, I'll have to check into that. And so they held a meeting, and the Attorney General's office determined that they said they went in for advice, legal advice, and the Attorney General determined that it was like 2 minutes of legal advice, and then the rest of the hour was just talking without me in the room. So they forced them to give me the minutes at least, and so I got at the story that way.
But did they find a knowing and willful violation
They did
in that
not.
case?
They did not.
How rare is knowing and willful violation?
Very rare. I don't even remember the exact reason why they did. I was like, please find this to be willful. The guy was warned, like by email, verbally, and they still found no willful. I think because it wasn't exactly the same as the previous violation. So I find very rarely that it's a willful violation.
Is there anything that you see that can be done about that? It seems like that could have been a case.
Yeah, I think just common sense, I think that could easily have, the guy admitted, the school committee chairman admitted that he had been told, and, I mean, what's more willful than that? So, a lot of it just comes down to enforcement and having a tougher stance, but it doesn't happen.
All right, thanks. Dan, your colleague at Channel 12, Walt Buteau, sought public records about a Seekonk police officer who resigned following an internal affairs investigation into alleged domestic violence case, and it turns out the officer was hired in 2018 by the Rehoboth Police Department, and after a 4-month process involving the Seekonk Police and the Massachusetts Public Records Division. Can you tell us about the documents that Channel 12 ended up receiving?
Yeah, so again, thank you for having all of us, and thank you all for being here. This is one of those examples where we don't want to be like Massachusetts either, right? Because they can be just as bad when it comes to the sort of public records process. Before I do, I just want to comment on both Amanda and Ethan's points, because I think this is sometimes overlooked. If you use the example of Patty Morgan and you use Ethan as an example, in Ethan's case, he's a reporter, and so sometimes we forget that people think this is just reporters kind of being whiny and they want more access, but keep in mind that in a door locking at a school board meeting means that the mother who is 10 minutes late because she has to, make dinner for the kids can't come to the school board meeting to find out about what's happening, right? In Patty Morgan's case, right, Patty Morgan, the context to that is she was a candidate for governor, Republican, thorn in the side of the Attorney General and certainly the Democrats that run the state of Rhode Island. No excuse, right? Does not matter that she, is a thorn in the side of anybody, right? These are public records, and so just, this goes beyond the public figure and the reporter. It's important to everybody. It's important to, I'm sure this is why a lot of folks are here. To go into the Walt Buteau thing, and I didn't help him with this story at all, so I actually kind of interviewed him like a reporter while I was preparing for this session, and we talked about it, and this is a case of the government oftentimes can double and triple down when it really doesn't want to release things. It's why we need newsrooms with lawyers and folks who are willing to fight for public records, because in this case it's an example of a police officer who I believe had a domestic violence situation and was charged. I don't know if he was convicted, but was charged, was terminated, and was allowed to take a job sort of in the next district over without any disclosure that he had been involved in this domestic situation as a cop at the other police department. And we wanted an internal affairs report. We wanted a bunch of different things to know what was happening. We thought it was really important that the folks of the community should know if they're hiring an officer. Here's what the background looks like. Certainly, if you're applying to a department, in Providence and things like that, Amanda knows this very well. They thoroughly vet the candidates, and then oftentimes when folks are not happy with who gets picked, they come to us and talk about it. So, what happened was. The town was very reluctant to release lots of records, and we appealed to the state of Massachusetts. I believe it's the Secretary of State. It's a division of the Secretary of State's office.
As opposed to the Attorney General here.
That's right.
In Rhode Island handles
that's
open
right.
records issues. It's Secretary of State.
It's the Secretary of State's office,
states,
or like a department, a subset. And the department sided with us. They said you should release this. So great, win for us. The Seekonk appealed. We won again, and more records had to be, they were still reluctant to give us records at all. Ultimately, they did have to release what was heavily redacted. You saw Amanda's slide of the, just black marks. If you watch the video that Walt aired, you see just document page after page after page of just all black. We ultimately lost that case, though. It was appealed for a third time, and they ended up, the department ended up siding with Seekonk. We still got a lot of records, but we were never able to get in-depth details about sort of what this officer had allegedly done to, I believe it was his girlfriend at the time. Luckily, one of the things that is, and this is a fun trick that all of us up here as reporters often find, and Walt was telling me about this, he was very excited. Sometimes in appealing, and as this process happens, we can learn things about our government and our officials. And in the process of appealing, there's a carve-out in the Massachusetts law, and I'm not intimately familiar with it, but my understanding is that if you have some sort of domestic violence situation, there's reason to redact. There's some level of justification that is provided. But in the appeal, then the town of Seekonk had to admit that, sure enough, there was a domestic violence situation, and so we were able to report it out a little bit more. But it was in my opinion, a sort of gross overreach from them, and we think folks should absolutely be able to know the backgrounds of all people, their public safety employees.
Very good, thanks. I think you raised a good point about, reporters often get accused by public officials, oh, you're just trying to sell newspapers. And I think we've always thought of it as more we're representing the public and going to the school committee meetings and pursuing these records on their behalf and reporting what we find. And just, Amanda, stick with the point you raised about the lapel pins and everything. So you maybe not, if we're not concerned about the lapel pin price itself, but wasn't the bigger issue there that the Attorney General's opinion on that had talked about the definition of how a memorandum would be exempt from disclosure. Not just that memorandum, but any...
All memorandums. And
so
who
that
defines what a memorandum is?
Yeah, if you just call it a memorandum.
A memorandum, and it could be anything. I mean, the idea is like, if it's notes, if it's a working document. And we actually later had to sit down with the Attorney General, Nerona, about what exactly do you consider a memo? And he said he's going to look into it, which is great. He's going to look at everything that was redacted and see whether this was handled properly. We don't think so. But just slapping, that this is a memo on top of it as a heading doesn't mean it should automatically be exempt.
So yeah, Peter Nerona is the new Attorney General, and he's going to
Attorney
review that decision. So another case that you dealt with, Amanda, can you tell us about the months-long fight you had with the Cranston police to get an arrest report about a chief aide in the State Department of Labor and Training who was charged with sexual assault? Well, what did the Cranston police say when you asked for those records, and what did the Attorney General do about it?
So this was a really weird thing, and normally when we write about an arrest, I always want to see the arrest report. It's not enough just to talk to the cops or go to the court, because I want to see what exactly did you do. What happened, what are the allegations, who's the officer involved? I mean, kind of basic things. So the Providence police arrested a man who was an aide for Governor Raimondo, accusing him of luring a young man off the streets down in South Providence, taking him to his home, then kind of making sexual advances at him and promising him a state job. And the young man allegedly stabbed this aide, Daniel Brown, and ran away. And that's how it was exposed to the police. So when I'm looking through Daniel Brown's record after he was charged with this sexual assault, I noticed he'd been charged by Cranston police. The charge was eventually dismissed, and it appeared, by the way I was reading it in the court records, it was probably because the victim didn't want to pursue the charges. But it's still, an arrest report is a public record. I always get arrest reports. So I emailed the chief and got a response back that they believed it would be an invasion of Daniel Brown's privacy to give me this arrest report. And I pointed out again that this is a public record. It's already been adjudicated. You're not investigating anymore. And this led to a fight. They ended up having 2 city solicitors write different letters to me explaining why they weren't going to give me this arrest report, which only made me more curious. And because if you want a reporter to never go away, tell them no. And so we spent the next couple of months, I appealed to the Attorney General. And when you appeal to the Attorney General, you have to lay out your case. You have to show that this is what I asked for. This is what they've said. This is why I believe I should get this report. And they lay out their argument. And months later, the Attorney General's office, Sean Linus, agreed. Yes, you should release this report. This is indeed a public record. And I got it. There were 2 things that were a problem. It's great that the Attorney General found that the Cranston police had violated and gave me the report. What happened in this incident, though, and what actually Steve Brown of the ACLU has pointed out, and if you look at an audit of the way that the Attorney General's office has handled complaints about the Access to Public Records Act, is that even when they find that there's a violation, it's very rare that the Attorney General's office will issue fines or really punish the agency that violated the law. So, my opinion, they had nothing to lose. I mean, they waited out. Eventually, I'll probably go away because it's not newsworthy anymore. They'll wait out a member of the general public because perhaps you're not going to pursue it. Maybe you don't have a lawyer who wants to help you out. So there's no teeth to that. The other thing that Steve Brown pointed out, when you get a decision by the Attorney General's office, it'll be several pages of explaining, here's the case, here's why we've decided, here's the case law that we're citing. When the Attorney General's office looked at it, they answered some of the complaints that the Cranston police had, saying that this was an invasion of privacy, that under the law, this should have, when his case went away, the public record should have been destroyed, the way you destroy like fingerprints or mugshots or things like that when a case goes nowhere. So they said no, this is still a public record. But they also explained, as Steve Brown pointed out, that here's a way that you would have been able to withhold this document. We don't need the Attorney General's office to go that far. It's a public record, here you go. Don't say, but if you tried this, if you'd gone this way, maybe you could have withheld it. So that was a little frustrating. What we found out when I finally got the record was, guess what? Daniel Brown had done the exact same thing in Cranston. In fact, they had the video because the young man in that case had also recorded him. And Daniel Brown admitted that he volunteered at his church in Providence, and that he often had young men from the church over at his house. So the report was redacted. I didn't get the name of the church, but I was able to figure it out. I was able to write this report. But boy, this would have been really interesting to know at the time that Providence charged him that this had happened before. And I still don't understand why the Cranston police would withhold this arrest report, because they've given me other arrest reports in the past. I don't know why they did it.
And it seems like a clear case of public interest in that information.
Absolutely.
Versus
And
privacy.
I'm not accusing of the police, the investigators, of doing anything wrong at the time. I mean, we see this sometimes with sexual offenses that, the victims sometimes don't want to see it all the way through. It's not the police's fault if they don't want to go through it. So I don't know why they chose to withhold it. That's what happened.
Dan, another colleague of yours at Channel 12, Tim White, reported on a North Providence. I'm glad it wasn't a picture of Tim. Reported on a North Providence case where a firefighter was accused of stealing medication from a terminally ill patient. Tell us about this document.
Yeah, so this is one of those ones that we have pasted to the wall in Tim White's office because we like to laugh about it and tell stories about it. I think what's really important about that story, and it is as straightforward as Ed kind of gave it. A firefighter was accused of stealing meds from somebody, and the big thing that we often go through this fight, which is if it were somebody else, if it were me, if it were somebody in the audience that was accused
Especially
of
if it
doing
was
this,
you.
especially if it was me, would the same level of redaction happen? And I think I don't know about Ethan, but Amanda and I kind of chase each other around at the police station in Providence a lot, and I don't know, how often do you get a report that's redacted like that?
Never.
Right, very rarely.
From them, anyways.
At least from them, right? And so you know, I've often I've joked about this that you know, the going to the police station in the morning and grabbing police reports is a relatively small part of my job, but Amanda and I and Brian Amaral at the Journal now too have an immense amount of power when it comes to sort of showcasing sometimes pretty wacky things that happen. And we, you know, the way this works is we go to a police station and we grab, we get a rundown, a list of things that happened, say, the night before. And, you know, and I've learned this all from Amanda, we, you know, see what we think might be interesting. And on first glance, we don't get to see every single police report, see everything, all the narratives. What we get to see is there was a burglary, there was a robbery, a felony assault, right? And felony assault's always going to end up being something that, okay, we got to look at that because if there was a shooting, folks should know, things like that. But one of the stories that I'm not particularly proud of, but probably more people saw this story throughout the world that I did than the combination of any hundreds other stories was years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, there was a man who went on a robbery spree, I guess, and he was a drug addict. He was looking for any money he could find to buy drugs, right? This is a guy in a bad space. And he robbed a bunch of, I think like 7-Eleven type stores with a potato in his pocket that he used as like a gun, to hide as a gun. Now, for television purposes at Channel 12, but certainly we know what's entertaining. We know what people are going to look at. And look, there was a guy that was going on robbery, so that's a news story. That story blew up, I think, it was just as I think Jay Leno was leaving The Tonight Show, and it ended up getting like a mention on The Tonight Show because of like silly criminal, right? We got, you know, that report unredacted, and you know, you come to find out as I sort of followed his case through, this is a guy who had been arrested probably 40 times in his life, again, down on his luck. Doesn't mean it's not newsworthy, but he was not given the same consideration that firefighter was given in North Providence. And I should say that's a common thing that happens sometimes when it's a public figure, sometimes when it's the child of a public figure. We've seen this countless times.
We'll get to that.
As you guys know.
I
So
get that.
yeah, it's really unfortunate.
And Tim did appeal those redactions, right?
He did, yeah, and I believe we ended up getting more, but I think we still mostly got a pretty redacted version. I think we got a little bit more, but it was still that's the one that we like to tell stories about.
Ethan, my father grew up in Pawtucket, so I hate to even raise the subject of the Paw Sox, but what did you find when you filed a public records request for the Apex department store property that had been targeted for the proposed new stadium for the Pawtucket Red Sox?
If I could first do a quick follow-up to what he was saying.
Sure.
It's interesting that Greg St. Jean firefighter ended up becoming a dispatcher in Pawtucket. And a couple months ago, I made a request because he had overdosed twice in one day, off duty. And it was like a verbal thing, and they basically said it was a medical report. I'm like, you know what, forget it. Weeks later, and I didn't think it was public to begin with. Weeks later, they filled out a records request on my behalf, and this goes to the solicitor in Pawtucket complaining about getting so many requests. He created a records request and denied me with pages of, I'm like, I didn't even put in an official request for this thing. So when these people talk about their great burden of having so many requests, a lot of it is if they had just given it to us either after we asked verbally or just as part of normal everyday business, it would be, we wouldn't have to fight them. So on to Apex. A lot of what we do is not the big expose of the criminals or the corrupt officials. We're trying to, with our requests, kind of have more than just he said, she said about something, give everybody's opinion. We want to kind of let them have their say, but also then give people what the truth is, and it might be just something basic like this. So Apex, Possox deal is gone. They've been a huge hang-up to development in downtown. The city is moving forward with trying to declare them a blighted property, which is all sorts of complicated, trying to take it by eminent domain, et cetera. So instead of just saying, we don't think we're blighted, and the city saying, you are blighted, I did a records request asking for all their citations for the past 20 years for what complaint, and it ended up all the complaints, or all the citations were based on complaints. So just everyday long grass, things like that, that nobody complains about, just kind of went by the wayside. So they had 50-something complaints where they were actually cited over 20 years, which gave residents the evidence that I was looking to get, that it actually is a neglected property. And a few weeks later, they did a bunch of cosmetic upgrades. They painted the place. They put down new asphalt, and, or like a top layer, and some lines on the parking lot, which I took as kind of, we're not neglected, but if you go there, there's no cars in the parking lot. Interesting note, Apex is still open, even though there's no cars in the parking lot.
Because
So.
we'd always say the former Apex, and oh no, wait a
Yeah,
minute.
it's still there. You can shop.
Amanda, speaking of relatives of public officials, Amanda, public access to records office often runs up against privacy interests. Can you tell us what happened when you requested the records of the state police investigation into a 2012 graduation party hosted by then Governor Lincoln Chafee's son that left an underage girl hospitalized and the governor's teenage son accused of violating the state social host law?
Well, you can see the headline, so you know how it ended. It wasn't good. And since then, I have to say, I don't know about my colleagues here, but I've heard the privacy interest or privacy concern raised by public officials more than once. In fact, multiple times within the last couple of years when I've asked for records, and it all goes back to Caleb Chafee. I think we need to flash back to remind everybody how this all started. So Caleb Chafee, governor's son, he's graduating from high school, and I want to say it was in April or early May. First, he's arrested with another kid in Jamestown after they tried to buy some alcohol. Actually, they had alcohol in the trunk of the kid's car. And we know this because the Jamestown police released the police report. In fact, it was even posted, I think, on maybe your website or the Channel 10 website. And so we all could read it, and because both of them were adults. And so we saw that the governor's son had attempted to buy alcohol at one of the liquor stores, got some attention. He stopped by the police, and the police quote him as saying, "I'm pleading the fifth," and telling his friend, "You plead the fifth." And so it was ridiculous.
The mob.
Yeah, right. So he learned. So you know, it was kind of an amusing story, sort of, and but a one-day story. So then WPRO, I would say about a month later, has leaked a police report from the state police, and they put it on their website, and it's redacted, so you can't read all the names, but it's Caleb Chafee is hosting a giant blowout high school graduation party at Weehoo's, the family's compound in Exeter. And we want to know what's going on. The state police haven't charged anybody. They're investigating it. But this is the first we've ever heard that this has even happened. So there's a total media frenzy. We all are asking for it. I had asked Colonel O'Donnell at the time. I said, can you send me the report on this? Because I am used to dealing with Providence Police, Cranston Police, Warwick Police, Jamestown Police, et cetera. All these places that, sure, here's your report. And he told me, he says, you know, it's still under investigation. So under the law, okay, that's fine. They're investigating. We're doing our own homework. We find out the Senator Whitehouse's son had stopped by. We talked to Senator Whitehouse about that. We find out Barrington Police Chief John LaCrosse had stopped by, but he was visiting, I think it was the governor's aide, so Horahan, who had a place in the compound. He talked about what he saw. He didn't see any drunk kids. Really want to know who bought the alcohol, who was there. The reason this all really came to light to the state police is not because anybody called the cops on them. It was because a girl who had been drinking at the party was escorted off the property and was in a car that had pulled over in 102. She ended up hospitalized with alcohol poisoning, and that led the state police to find out where she'd come from. In the police report that had been leaked, it also said that Caleb Chafee had said to get her out of there, that he was concerned about her, not concerned about her welfare, but just wanted her off the property. It also said that he had told other kids to plead the fifth, told them to lawyer up when they were being investigated. So we wait until he's charged, I think, as a social host in August. Once he's charged, I asked Colonel O'Donnell, I said, okay, now can I have the report? He said, no, you can't have it because it's really just a violation. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was ridiculous. We go to court, we follow it there. I did talk to the girl and her family as well, but they didn't want to go public, so I really couldn't do anything with it. And then we launched a fight, and we ended up at the Supreme Court where they shot us down. Now, our argument had always been, and from the very beginning, from my very first email to Colonel O'Donnell, was this is in great public interest. It's the governor's son. Also, the state police answer to the governor, so there is a lot of scrutiny on you. I was also concerned because, honestly, if your kids got arrested, I'd get your report. But this is the governor's kid, and I'm not getting it. We'd gotten it from the Jamestown police. Why would the state police be any different? So the Supreme Court, when they shot us down, said it was an invasion of Caleb's privacy. And it was kind of a catch-22 situation, which still hurts us to this day, was that if I am saying, and I wasn't really saying, that the state police handled this improperly, then I hadn't provided any evidence. Well, I don't know what they did because I don't have the report. I can't prove it or disprove it. Maybe they did everything right. They're a part of this story, but they're not the whole story. And they also said, even so, it's an individual case and it doesn't show a pattern. I mean, it still burns me. It still burns. I can get going on this for a while. And other police agencies, because there is a professional rivalry among all the police agencies in Rhode Island, said, we would have given you that report. And I bring that up to them whenever they say no. Remember you said?
And is the theme that's emerging here is in that balancing test between the public's right to know, public interest, and privacy of especially certain people that the public is losing?
Yeah, I do think so. I understand the idea, the concept of a balancing test, and I definitely understand individual privacy. I didn't want to know every little thing about this silly party. I just wanted to know what the heck happened and how was it handled. We were rejected when I asked for a Pawtucket police report. It was on a murder-suicide. And I'd gotten a lot of the information actually from neighbors and friends who knew the couple. But I got nothing from the police, including the names of the people who died. I thought it was definitely a public interest. You certainly want to know when someone is killed. I was also interested because a week before, the woman had gone to the police and said that she was concerned her husband was going to kill her. So I really wanted to know how the police handled it. They said that was an invasion of privacy. And they said because no one was arrested, there was no arrest report. Well, no one's arrested because the guy's dead. So, but in that case, I'd asked for everything. But I get you're going to redact some things. I get that the public, I don't need to see gory details. I don't necessarily need to see all the investigative techniques that law enforcement is using, in certain cases. I am willing to work with these agencies because I believe that if we work together, there is transparency and there is democracy. But flat out, a person saying, or an agency saying, we believe this violates somebody's privacy, I think it puts a lot in the hands of an agency that may have something to lose or something to hide. And maybe I'm just cynical.
Good points. Dan, you asked for some records after former city councilman Kevin Jackson, seen here, was accused of embezzling from the track and field group, the Cobras. And what did you find from that records request?
Yeah, so the councilman who has been since recalled and is actually finishing up a brief term in minimum security prison, was somebody who we followed, and as a City Hall reporter, I covered him for years, and this all kind of started from another public record that was important, which is campaign finance reports. It's a huge part of, certainly as a political reporter, we're always very interested in who's raising money. We're also interested in who's not filing their reports, which is a violation of the law. It comes with fines. The councilman, who at the time of his arrest was the majority leader for the city council, pretty powerful guy, and was raising money off of being a pretty powerful guy. Not a lot, but was raising money off of being a powerful guy. Had just years of not filing his campaign reports, not just not on time at all, years of it, like one election and never filed anything. And so it starts off with us kind of looking at that process. We also, aside from that, we're very interested in these very obscure grants that the City of Providence, and many communities, the state has this, but the City of Providence gives out with very little oversight. In fact, not to be ridiculous, but I remember my lead when I wrote a story about this was, if you want a grant in the City of Providence, all you have to do is ask, according to City Council President, it was Mike Solomon at the time. In fact, it's the only way, right? Because you literally had to just go and basically kiss the rings of City Council members and say, hey, can I get $1,000 for my Little League? Can I get $1,500 for...
Not the Mount Pleasant Little League.
I should note, actually, we were a recipient, and I disclosed that in a story. But, so the councilman had had run a youth program called the Providence Cobras, very familiar, certainly if you're from the East Side. By the way, a wonderful organization that has really helped the lives of a lot of inner city kids, really important stuff. There's no question, like, the councilman was not an all bad person, but the city had given lots of grants, particularly grants that he had direct control over, literally the only signee to be able to give money, including to his own organization. So, two parallel paths of money giving out, that's always something we're interested in. Failing to file campaign finance reports, lots and lots of stories for years. Finally, he ends up charged with embezzling from the Providence Cobras, and then also misusing his campaign money. So then everything came together. And what we wanted to know was exactly how much money was given to the city, to his organization. It turned out to be about $67,000, and I'll tell you, it was quite difficult to get in the years prior to his arrest. The City of Providence has dozens and dozens of obscure account numbers, and so you say, I want all donations given to this organization, and they say, oh, it's not even a City of Providence fund. It was all, once he was arrested and kind of disgraced, the City of Providence was wonderful about giving of everything to us. And so that's how we ended up with learning that he had gotten a lot of money. Now again, that money, very much likely went to help the lives of these kids, but let's be clear, he was charged with embezzling from that program. He was charged with using money that was for those kids to fund his lifestyle, to pay rent, to pay for Netflix, things like that. And wasn't just charged, he was convicted, or I think he pled nolo, and is, like I said, finishing up a term in prison.
All right, we're going to have one more concrete example from Ethan, then we're going to have a tutorial so you guys will be able to make better use of the Access to Public Records Act. Ethan, can you tell us about what happened when you requested the list of vacant and abandoned properties from the city of Pawtucket?
One thing I've learned when I ask for something kind of off the cuff, and could I get this week, I'm working on a story, and they say, sure, no problem, just put it through an open records request through the lawyer's office. I'm pretty sure it's going to be months before I get that. And this was the case here, where all I asked for was a list of vacant and abandoned properties in the city. I was just interested. I wanted to know if properties were filling up the way they said they were, if there were certain trends in certain neighborhoods, thinking it would be an easy thing. Well, they pulled together everybody involved, police chief, fire chief, public safety, EMA. They all got together and created this monstrous response where if they gave this to me, it would create this public safety issue. Homeless people might start setting fires in these buildings. And I had said in my complaint, I said, they're posting these all over the internet anyway. They're trying to fill them up. And by the way, they're boarding them up so everybody knows, everybody in the neighborhood who might set a fire in it will know that it's vacant anyway. So I ended up winning this one. Once in a while we do win, which is great. And I think that this one, even though it might sound simple, set a really good precedent because they said it was a very close decision. But it differed from other decisions where like a sign-up list for a basketball league wasn't public record, that this one actually had a public interest behind it. And they tried to make the case that this list was like a working draft or working document, which is exempt. And I very vehemently rejected that notion because if you say that a list at any one time that could be updated next week or next month is a preliminary working draft, I think we can all figure out where that leads. And suddenly a lot of things are not public records. And so I was like, this is a final document at any given time. And when it's presented to the city council, when they request it at a certain meeting, it's a final document as of that point in time. And if you say that this is a working document, we're all in big trouble. So they ended up agreeing with me that they had no inkling that there was any validity to what they were saying. But again, huge effort on their part to try to keep this kind of basic document, and baffling to me why they would ever consider it something that would create a danger to the public.
By the way, really important precedent that got set because of Ethan in Pawtucket. Providence has to give up its vacant and abandoned properties, and likely I would assume all communities. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a great win. Often you hear public officials talk about my records, our records, and you hear judges talk about my jurors also, but that's another story. But the public pays for it. These are your records, and so I think an important part of today's event is to give members of the public a better understanding of the Access to Public Records Act and how they can use it. So Amanda, give us a quick tutorial.
Okay. So we actually published this in the journal when we had our first story in the transparency series, and I think there's some brochures that have gone out today as well to kind of tell you what to do. But start this way. Actually, I really like what Ethan had said about making the phone call first. When you want to find some records, and make sure that you know what agency might have them, and make sure it's a state agency or a quasi-public agency that has them. I recommend talking to a human being first, because once you start filing something, it becomes part of a process, and it can become a legal process, and it can be a lengthy process. I find like appealing to a human being first and talking to them and say, hey, I'm just trying to find this out. Where do you think I could find this? Is this something I can just go look up somewhere? You're more likely to get the information. Pawtucket, unfortunately, and the reason the city solicitor is so busy on weekends now processing APRAs is because they've decided you have to file an APRA for pretty much everything. It's something they've created for themselves. But not all agencies work this way. When you want to find something out, first of all, find the agency and understand the law, and be very specific with what you want to find out. I find that the more specific and more clear what you're looking for, the faster you're going to get a response. For example, if I'm looking for a police record and I know the date, or I know the person who's been charged. I was looking for something involved, a Pawtucket police officer involved shooting. They had arrested somebody in connection with that shooting. So I was very direct about, it happened on this day, I'm looking for this person, and send this to me, and I'm willing to pay this or not pay this. And you should identify yourself. You don't have to identify yourself when you go in person to ask for something, and you certainly don't have to explain why you want it.
And that's part of the law, right?
That is absolutely part of the law. It does not matter who you are. These are your records. These are public records. They do not belong to them. It's not up to them to decide how you get to use them. So you don't have to say anything. But they know who I am, and I'm probably going to use it for an article, for better or worse. So there are exemptions, and familiarize yourself with those exemptions because they can save you some time and figure out whether or not you can get it. There's a lot of personnel records that are exempt, but you can get employment contracts, you can get their salaries, you can get overtime, you can find out benefits, job titles, dates of employment. I love to do that. Every single time the administration changes hands and they start hiring a whole bunch of people, I file an APRA with the Human Resources, and I'm like, give me the name, the date of employment, the salary, the town, everything you can about all your city employees. That way I stay up to date. And when they get arrested, I already know something about them. Your police logs are public, so you can go in, even in Pawtucket, yes, you can walk in and go to the clerks and say, I want to see the police logs from overnight. It'll have basic information, the time that a call went out, maybe the names of the officers who went out, the call that was initially. I don't take that at face value. I've seen person annoyed who ended up to be person dead when she read the report. But at least you get a basic idea of what your cops might be up to. The initial arrest of an adult must be made public within 48 hours or 72 hours if it's a weekend or a holiday. Law enforcement records, they can be a little dicey. So when State Police this week told me they couldn't have an offense report, it wasn't public. That's not exactly true. However, related to investigations and the detection of crime, that's exempt from the public record only under certain conditions. So if it could be reasonably expected to interfere with the investigation, deprive someone of a fair trial, be an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, or disclose the identity of a confidential source. I don't complain when I get a police report that has redacted the name necessarily of a witness or a confidential source that they're using for an investigation. I get that. Once you know, send it in and set your clock. You have 10 business days, or they have 10 business days to send it to you. And you may have to pay for, I think it's what, 15 cents? 15 cents a page?
Do you want to address how much the cost of
Yeah, it's
searches
15
are?
cents, which I haven't found to be that bad. What I usually ask for it digitally, so as soon as they give me the bill, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that by email. So
How about search and retrieval costs, though?
First hour is free.
yeah,
First hour's
the
free.
first hour is free, but
People move really slowly
Yes.
for that first hour.
Which is
found-
actually what Patricia Morgan had complained about when they redacted. And she got a $4,000 bill.
You run out.
I found that they can
Sharpie.
play the games with the hourly billing much more than the 15 cents a page. Like 15 cents adds up kind of slowly, but when you're doing the hourly rate, they can like, oh, it took us 12 hours to find this document that we have in our computer. So it doesn't happen that often. Like I'm able to work around it. Sometimes somebody will say, hey, do you really want 5 years of records on this? Like it's 1,700 pages and it's going to cost you this much. I'm like, nah, just give me 2 years. That's fine. So there's a lot of back and forth, and we're not trying to give the impression that it might seem that way, but that every public agency and government official is trying to keep things secret. We do have a lot of really great working relationships and with people who want to get the information out, but there's layers and layers of bureaucracy a lot of times.
Yeah, the good people don't necessarily make the headlines because honestly, we're just writing about the stuff that's going on. Like I
Yeah.
can say that a lot about Providence Police. When they had the highway shooting, they were out within 24 hours with, we're going to tell you everything. Here's the body camera video. Here's the highway video. Here's other cell phone video. Here's what happened. Here's the names of the officers. And they stayed there as long as we were like tired of them.
They literally narrated that was amazing. Actually.
Yeah.
They showed us video of that infamous shooting right near the Providence Place Mall on the highway, and I remember we took it live. It was we very rarely break into news because like all my children is really important to people, but they literally, I think with like a
Yep.
laser pointer were like, see, this is what happened. This is happened. It was really, really good work by the Providence Police
And they
Department.
posted it on their website. So if you missed any of the TV or news coverage at all, you could watch it for yourself, decide for yourself.
Yeah.
In contrast, the state police, who were also part of that highway shooting, did not participate in that. In fact, it took several days of hounding by the media and the public before they came forward and said, okay, this is what we did too.
No, this is a good point. We're pointing out a lot of the examples of when public officials don't give records, but there are some public officials who really appreciate and respect the transparency and are good, and that's a great example. Just for the record, though, on cost, 15 cents doesn't sound a lot, but Massachusetts just reduced the cost per page from 20 cents. The Secretary of State reduced it from 20 cents to 5 cents, and especially when records are often being given online. So there's the Boston Globe story. So Dan, could you give us a little rundown on if the members of the audience are at a public meeting, when can they close the doors and kick them out, and when can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of the thing that in my day-to-day job covering the city, I spend a lot of time at public meetings, whether it's the city council, the school board, or I like to cover the city pension board. And
Who doesn't? I mean,
right.
there's a lot.
I should say to highlight and to give credit to the point of there are public officials and folks who try their best to do really important work. In the room today is the brand new city clerk for the city of Providence, Sean Selleck, who's in the green shirt right there. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Sean. Mm-hmm. The city of Providence is really good when it comes to open meetings and informing folks. They have their own open meeting portal, which is a lifesaver as a reporter. All public documents, all documents that are associated with things that are being discussed are posted there. So it is a really incredible resource. It's infinitely better than the Secretary of State's office at the state level, than any other community that I can find. And so kudos to you guys for doing that. And Sean led the way on that prior to being the city clerk and is now the clerk. When it comes to, enough with the over love. Now we're going to go over this. No. Open meetings are fairly straightforward. There's a couple of things that are really key to know. Virtually any city or town board, certainly anyone that's publicly funded, I believe it's a 25% threshold. Is that right, John? So if you're getting if you're a board that's getting more than 25% of your funding through the government, through taxpayers, you are subject to open meetings laws. And the key things that I think are really important, of course, is the board has to post publicly within 48 hours, or they have to give at least 48 hours notice to the public, which no longer counts the weekends it used to, and does not count anymore. And so, meaning that means that in Providence's case, with their open meeting portal, you're always going to be able to see that, but usually the Secretary of State's office has all meetings for various, hundreds and hundreds of boards throughout the state, cities and towns, and then of course all the state level government. So 48 hours notice is really important. When it comes to, and this is a major sort of the issue that I can be kind of a stickler about, is going into executive session. There are very clear sort of guidelines about what allows executive session, what allows the board to go in executive session, which means kick us out, and kick everyone out except for usually the council and or the board itself, and usually the legal counsel and maybe the person or people who are somehow directly involved in whatever's being discussed. But usually where I run into this issue is if you're having a discussion about a legal matter, usually a lawsuit or a settlement. I've been covering a lot. I've been writing a lot of stories about in the city of Providence. Recently separated with its longtime HR director. And wanted to pay out a fairly large six-figure severance package, and the city council has to, there's a committee that has to approve that. They've been meeting in executive session. They kind of blow us out. Like I said, usually it's related to legal matters or personnel matters. But it doesn't hurt sometimes to let folks know that you know, to even question why it's happening. I'll give you an example. Very recently in Providence, the city named, there's a police review board called the Providence External Review Agency or Authority, PERA. They recently named an executive director, and they wanted to meet in executive session to introduce the selection for the executive director to the board. And so they kicked the reporters out, and myself and the Madeline List from the Providence Journal were kind of sitting around, and in fact, I should go back. They were not actually, they didn't want to introduce. They just wanted to discuss that they were going to hire a person. And so we were sitting outside, and up walks the person who certainly she and I knew was the pick to be this, the new executive director. It's a young lawyer named Jose Batistas, very smart guy. Nothing wrong with him. But he starts to walk into the room, and I was like, you're in executive session. You can't, you're not allowed to go in there. No one asked you to go in there. Just by asking the question, it forced the board to make a decision. Are they going to have him in, or are they going to close the doors to us? And they didn't want to deal with whiny Dan McGowan. And so they opened the doors, and they had a fairly public interview process. Now that is actually technically that's up to the nominee. He could have asked for a closed door process, but you know, when you're overseeing a civilian board, it's probably not the best idea to do that. They allowed the reporters in. We got to, you know, really understand what people were thinking. So yeah, the biggest thing on that, you know, on executive session tends to be around legal settlements and things like that. I understand it. I don't love it. I let people know that I don't love it. And I sort of do like a disappointing face and then hope that next time they'll be okay. Sometimes that works, by the way.
Can we see your disappointed face? You can see why that's effective. But to stick with Dan, could you give us a rundown on any legislation that's before the General Assembly this year regarding open meetings?
Sure. Yeah. There's a handful of bills that I know have been introduced. The one that and I should, in full disclosure, I'm a member of the Access RI board, and I know that Steve Brown from the ACLU. I see John and Jane and Linda here. All who helped give input to S471, which is sort of an overall, not a rewrite, but lots of additions to open meetings or in public records, and a couple of the key points that I take away. One is the example of when you can go into executive session, which I think is really important. Like I mentioned, there's a specific outline for when a board, you can't just, a board or a city council wouldn't just be able to say, we're worried about litigation, and so we're going to meet in executive session and discuss everything. There has to be something, I believe, in writing that, you know, a threat of a lawsuit, something like that. It's really important because it's really easy. One of the things that I think all the three of us up here find is that if there is a way to not give us something, or if there is a way to go into executive session, there are certainly folks who would much rather not have us not see it. Not always, but you know, if you're discussing sensitive things, then maybe you want to have a candid conversation. You don't necessarily want a reporter in the room. I completely disagree with that, but I get it. And so that would be really important. It would make it more clear that you have to have something in writing. I think one of the other things, and as I mentioned, Providence does this very well, but other communities and other state agencies don't always record meetings. Remember, not everybody's paid to go to the school board, right? And so, and unfortunately, way fewer of us than ever. So, and so it would sort of expand the requirements in terms of what has to be recorded, whether it's audio or visually. Like I said, Providence is great about this. They record virtually everything. on audio. It's really nice. And when Providence doesn't record it, to give another shout out in the room, Steve Alquist is there and he records it. So thank you, Steve. And so those are the two key points that I think are really important. I don't know the state of legislation and where it's going to happen. I think it's sponsored by, certainly key leaders on the Senate side. So we'll cross our fingers and hope something happens. But these things tend to move slowly.
Yeah, it's Senate Bill 471, and then there's a companion bill in the House, 5702. And one thing, if you didn't get one on the way in, the Rhode Island ACLU has created these nifty pamphlets. This one's open meetings, this one's Access to Public Records Act, so that contains a lot of good information to take with you today. Final question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions, is just what's the main takeaway you want these people to go out into the cold with? Let's start with Amanda.
Ask for what you want and don't give up when you're told no. And understand that even though we've been up here kind of complaining about the problems that we've had in trying to access these records, they were dealing with other human beings who are trying to do their jobs. And I try to approach them as, let's figure out how we can do this. Let's figure out how we can have transparency, and you can help me, and I can help you. And this is an integral part of our democracy. If we don't do it, it can't just be the media who's out here looking for public records or going to these meetings. It has to be you. It can't just be us all the time. And you have a right to this information. You have a right to know what your government is doing and how public agencies are behaving and whether they're following the law and what's happening. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm really glad you're taking an interest in this. And I hope you follow up.
Yeah, and I would just say everything Amanda said, to co-sign on that, but also to say, and we've mentioned this a bunch of times, these are your records, right? It's not about reporters. It's about, these are what governments and police departments and school boards, right? All of this stuff, this is publicly funded. It's information that you should be allowed to know about. You don't have to. I'm not, we don't, it's perfectly fine if you live your life without needing to put in a public records request. I'm not going to shame you for not doing that. But there are really important things, and to Amanda's point about not just about their reporters not being able to do it, we get a lot of, especially in Providence, we hear a lot of conversations about various neighborhood things that are happening, a fight over zoning or a fight over, there's been a lot of things on the east side, as I think folks know. And so, sometimes it does help to have an interested party, somebody who's just an affected neighbor, be able to put in some questions, and you know what, when you get stonewalled, then you're probably on to something. And that's when you should call me.
Or me.
No, not Amanda.
I would just encourage you, it's not as difficult as it looks. We might have made it seem really, really difficult all the time. But sometimes the average person might know more about these APRA and Open Meetings Act than a public official. So a lot of them are brand new, especially with the local coverage. They're coming in with few qualifications. Sometimes they just were the only one running or happen to get in because people like them in the community. So you guys, with a few hours of study, can be ahead of, this is not to denigrate public officials, but you can be ahead of a lot of them, and especially the new ones. So just be confident. I think, don't assume that they know a lot more than you. I was told by the chairman of a committee that I needed to submit everything written, like my email requests simply weren't appropriate. So I was like, how do you not know this? It's right in, did you not read it before you, and he's been on the committee for a long time. So we get a lot of that, like, oh, we know better than you, and it's just not true. This isn't some big, scary government that knows more than the average citizen a lot of times. You, just by reading and remembering what's in there, these certain types of meetings, you're allowed to talk about security, you're allowed to talk about litigation and contract negotiations, and very little else, you can school a public official just like that. And no, you can't kick me out of this meeting. And just show up and encourage public officials who do it right. I would say if you read a story about how the Valley Breeze is challenging something, or one of these news outlets, just encourage them. Say, thank you for doing the right thing, or please do the right thing the next time. Because that feedback from other people other than us annoying reporters is really important.
Good points, good points. So John's going to run a microphone around. Far away.
Try to do my Phil Donahue.
Get your steps in, John.
I need more white hair.
Thank you. I'm interested in the privacy exemption for the records request and the examples you gave. It sounded like any agency could claim a privacy exemption, and is that correct? And then you have to appeal it, and maybe on the appeal you would win or not?
Gosh, you know, it feels that way lately, because when I get pushback, that's exactly what I'm hearing. There's a privacy exemption. And I'm pushing back when it's very clear that something is a public record. For example, how is there a privacy exemption for someone who has been arrested? We don't have private arrests. We don't have secret police. And arraigned in court, which is a public area, or sentenced in court, which is a public area. So I'll push back in something like that. And one of the things when you appeal, if you get shot down for any reason at all, not just privacy, they have to tell you exactly why, not just what we think it's privacy. We'll explain how the privacy of this person would be affected. We already know who it is. The privacy issue has been a bigger issue since the Caleb Chafee case. There's no question about that. The balancing act that came in after the change to the law in 2012, I've really seen a lot more of that as well. And a dialogue really helps with the people who are saying no to you.
Can I add just one
Yeah.
thing, and I don't know if Steve wants to add to this, but you referred to, so in 2012, the public records law was significantly changed.
Right.
Really the headline change was the introduction of a balancing test. Prior to 2012, the law said any personally identifiable record could be withheld. And since 2012, you can make a request for a personally identifiable record, but the public official has to weigh the privacy interests of the individual versus the public interest in the record. So that's what you hear about the balancing test.
Hi, thank you. I just had a couple of questions. Is there a reason after the Caleb Chafee case that wasn't pursued beyond the Rhode Island Supreme Court? And that's a legal question, I understand, and I'm just curious. And then the second thing I just wanted to ask about, where we talked about no teeth, I believe there's an option if some of the organizations wanted to chase it, to pursue these through directors and officers insurance. When you have a ruling of a clear violation, there is in fact often the money piece is actually there in insurance. Now there's a social question as to whether that's worth kind of the offset, because then taxpayers will pay more for public insurance. But it just, when there's really that willful, nonsense, it is important, I think, to figure out how to hold people accountable, and we don't have the teeth for that right now.
Yeah, for the Caleb Chafee case, once it hit the Supreme Court and we lost, that was it for the Journal. And those decisions are made way beyond me. They decide on hiring lawyers and how far to go, but that was pretty much the end for us.
Well, is there anywhere to go beyond the Rhode Island Supreme Court? I mean, that's
I don't know. I
That's-
thought that was pretty much
That's
it.
the
Yeah.
highest court in the
Yeah.
state, so if it's a state law, they're the final word, so they couldn't go to federal court unless there was some federal law.
Because, for example, there is a reporter in Rhode Island that pursued an action against the Department of the DEA over federal records on a drug case.
Yeah, if it's federal, you could go to
Yeah.
federal
Yeah,
court,
he
but
got
that
to
was
go
a
to the-
state,
But
that was
if,
state law.
but again, where is there a point where there's enough constitutional merit in the argument that there is in fact an opportunity to pursue it beyond that?
We need more media lawyers.
I second that.
Hi. If the Attorney General's office denies an APRA request made to the Attorney General's office, what's the appeal process? Can you appeal to the Attorney General, or do you have to go to Superior Court and spend $20,000?
From my understanding, you go to court.
Are you sure about that? And is there a precedent on that being set?
That's what we've done. That's actually what we did in the
Okay.
Caleb Chafee case, yeah.
Yeah, every
Yeah.
response they send out says you have this option available to you. To-
Even the communities send it out, it says that on the communities thing, it's required by the law to be sent out. But I've looked at all of the decisions on the website, just about all, I think, hopefully all, and I haven't never seen that. But I don't see where the public should have to spend $20,000 to appeal a decision from the Attorney General denying a public document.
yeah.
And the document that I've requested, they've deemed to be a public document in the community where the document originated from. But now they're denying it. So,
Yeah.
Did you talk to the ACLU?
Steve, Steve
Steve's
will
in the
pay.
back.
They're in the back.
Thanks so much. Great conference. This is good, really good. Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Over the past several years, there's been an uptick in the use of technology everywhere. Body cams on police officers, cameras in just about every venue where public meetings occur, town council, zoning boards, planning boards, everywhere. Couple of questions with that. What is considered a public record when it comes to either audio recordings or video recordings in those types of venues? And then immediately after those types of sessions, if I walk up to someone on a whatever, zoning board, town council, or in a public place, in a public setting, do I have the right, or do I have the both audacity and right to both ask questions and record it?
You got a couple of great questions in there. One of them has to do with the police body cams is an emerging technology, and Amanda's been dealing with that from the NEFAC board. So could you bring us up to date on what's the landscape on that? Are those going to be public records, or other state?
Okay, that's, so the body camera thing is an issue I'm working on right now and looking at how that's handled kind of across the country. You know, the Providence Police Department has it, and they had promised and delivered that the first time that whenever they had an officer involved shooting, they would release that body cam video. Other than that, they haven't been willing to release it, and I haven't pushed it yet. But they get requests for the body cam videos, and they said that they don't consider them necessarily public records. We're going to work on that. But they are releasing them in criminal cases. They also show them when there's a civilian complaint against an officer. So, but I haven't personally yet requested them, but that's an issue I'm working on right now. Your question on public records, I need my glasses to look at this, but I'll give you the definition. All materials generated or collected by public entities in connection with the conduct of official business, documents, films, photos, recordings, letters, maps, electronic data processing records, some emails, but of course there are multiple exemptions as well. I've been able to get audio, video recordings, emails.
But then you're also talking about when people want to film a public meeting, like I know Steve Alquist, you've run into problems with.
But immediately after, so once whatever the official thing is over, can I walk up? School committee. So what did you think about that? Why did you vote that way?
Absolutely.
Why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. It might be, you might be,
Post it?
you sure? You
Why
can
not?
do whatever you want. Yeah, yeah. No, and I think it's really important. One of the other things too is no doubt that even I use Providence as an example of a place that does post all of its recordings for its open for open meetings. But years ago, I remember I got into an issue prior to Providence's move to do that. I was really interested in these loans that were going out in the city of Providence to small businesses, and I remember getting I requested like 12 years of meeting minutes, and it was really fun to read all this stuff. And it just hit on me. I think I was reading in the documents that something about an audio recording of a meeting, but I didn't know where that lived. And sure enough, I was able to get all the recordings of the meetings also. And again, now Providence does a better job with that. But yeah, I mean, even if the school board meeting is taped or recorded, that is a public record that you should be able to get your hands on, even if it's not posted somewhere.
Ed, maybe one more. Steve has
Sure.
a comment.
Steve.
Sure. In my time, I've twice been told I wasn't able to film at an open meeting. Once was at this Cranston City Council, and the second time was at RIPTA, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. And both times I basically said, no, I'll be recording. And, you know, I was even threatened with arrest at RIPTA, but they pulled back. And I was able to record both meetings. But I did have a question. You talk about being anonymous or being able to be anonymous if you make an APRA request. And I recently worked with a group here in Rhode Island who wants to be anonymous, so I won't say who they are, but they were requesting records from the prison. And then they were told, well, you have to come here and pick it up because they didn't want to provide a mailing address. They said, that's fine, but then they said, well, we also have to pay with a check. And now these are all identifiable things, right? And so I ended up going and getting it under my name. I said, and I brought a money order, and I said, we'll just do it this way, which is fine. But then when we got the request, which was prison records about people being turned over to ICE, every name was redacted. Now, these are, which was very weird, right? Because you'll go through and it'll say what country they're from, it'll say all the information, but they inked out the name of the person. Now, this has happened yesterday, so we haven't followed up, but I really want to, it cost $127 to get information that's essentially useless because it doesn't, and all we have is the number of people, dates, and countries, but we don't have the names. And part of the reason was we wanted to reach out to people who might be left here in Rhode Island and talk about the impacts this might have on families, but now we don't even have the names of the people. So I just wanted to bring that up because we'll be pursuing that, but I just wanted to know if you have any comments on that, because the anonymity kind of works both ways on here, and it seems like it makes it really difficult for a community group to get the kind of information they need to continue to work. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're appealing that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. I'm not that familiar with immigration law. I know that when I've gone to cover an issue in immigration court in Boston, they don't give out, there's a lot of immigration records you can't get. You have to know, the alien number of the person you're following up on. So there is a lot of confidentiality. I can't really speak to that. But to your point of not having to identify yourself when you go get records, yeah, I agree with you. That isn't right.
And that came up, I get a little feedback. The state police, I think you remember, wanted to make people, when they picked up records at the state police headquarters, sign in.
It wasn't just picking up records, in fact, because I wrote the original story. It was just coming into their lobby, and you had to sign in, and then they would check you for warrants while you were there. That was under Colonel O'Donnell. That ended after I wrote the story, but it was kind of posted, and they're like, "Yep."
Yeah.
How to discourage a visitor.
And that became, and it would be to discourage picking up a public record.
Or
right?
just
'Cause
coming
you're-
in,
you're
right,
waiving
right.
your anonymity
Right.
By having to sign in.
Yeah,
so.
you should not be in it. This is here's a gripe that I have with the city of Providence. There are times where there are meetings that they do have people. They ask you to sign something because you're in attendance. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you don't have to do anything. There's absolutely no reason for that, because if you're let's say you're an activist and you have strong opinions on whatever's being discussed, and you don't want to, for whatever reason, give your name. I think you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't feel pressured to, and you don't have to under the law. It's not shouldn't. You don't have to.
Yeah, that's not just Providence. A
Yeah.
lot of communities will try to say that the people who don't know better, I think a lot of the time, you have to sign in, and it's just not true.
Well, I think we're getting kicked out of here, so let's give our panelists a round of applause. We covered a lot of ground. Get these pamphlets before you go. Any final words, John?
Yeah, just two. One, we'll have this video up online sometime next week after I figure out how to edit it. And our next event is May 18th, same time, same room. about redistricting and how it's done in Rhode Island. But yeah, thank you all for coming out, and thanks to the panelists, and thank you to Ed